Freddy Krueger, horror movie icon, child of 1,000 maniacs. Might be one of my favorite horror movie villains. Honestly, probably in the top 20 favorite fictional characters. But what happens when the fictional character Freddy Krueger invades the real world? How sweet. Fresh meat. Actually, I have a stuffed Freddy Krueger doll somewhere around here.
Come to Freddy. Welcome to my nightmare.
I have a stuffed Freddy Krueger doll. It's quite terrifying. And then we take a look at the story of two young lovers walking down the road one day, completely minding their own business. But they are about to be attacked by a paranormal entity that is so destructive, you don't know how bad it can get until you're standing at the bottom of the pit. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio.
Actually, I'm a lot freaked out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having so much fun doing whatever you're doing. Man, it is good to be back doing this show. I know I just took a week off, but it felt like an eternity. I really had to get my head straight, so thank you, all of you who stayed around for that. You guys mean a lot to me. I really appreciate you guys checking out the show. We got a lot of stuff to cover today, so let's go ahead and get this party started. First off, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command, everyone get on your feet and give it up for Insiditus. Woohoo! Yeah, wee! Haha! Yeah, galloping in. I had to look up what that name meant. Insiditus. It's not a disease, although I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Insiditus was a horse senator in Rome. Apparently, I don't know. I just read the first paragraph of the Wikipedia page. At some point, they probably just ran out of senators and elected a horse. It was basically like that show Air Bud, that movie Air Bud, but with a horse, and it was real, and it was in ancient Rome. Insiditus is our latest Patreon supporter. That's why, Insiditus, you are going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially, if you guys were never members of the Roman Senate, that's fine too. It really is. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. And Insiditus, before we get this party started, we do got a lot of stuff to talk about. But one thing I do want to talk about is coming up, I will be once again speaking live at the Port Gamble Ghost Conference in Port Gamble, Washington. The conference goes from November 8th to November 10th, 2024. I will be speaking on the 8th. But I'm telling you, this is a top-notch paranormal convention. If you guys are able to get out here, it's really cool because the whole town is haunted. And where they actually hold the paranormal conference is haunted. And it's a great weekend. If you guys are interested in ghosts, it's fantastic. Even if you're not coming to see me, it is a great conference. There's some great walking tours you can go on, a ton of great speakers. So November 8th through the 10th in Port Gamble, Washington. You can go to portgamble.com for more info. And then I didn't get to talk about this because things got so crazy personally going on, but I had done the Big Sky Paranormal Conference before I took my break. That was awesome. There was a little bit of a technical snafu, but it was fine. I got to speak. My big head was on a giant monitor in a room, and I got to give my presentation on why are there no fat ghosts. It was absolutely fantastic. We took questions afterwards, and one of the questions was more of a statement of anything. They go, I think you mispronounced the name of that town you just said in your speech. And I was like, that person obviously doesn't listen to my podcast. I'm glad they came to the presentation, but I mispronounced everything. The names of cities, states, and Roman horses. But yeah, Big Sky Paranormal, that was an awesome festival as well. I know some of you guys were able to attend, and then I didn't get to speak on Saturday, but I spoke on Sunday, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that next year. I'd like to go out there personally, do it in person next year. I think we'll be able to do that if they invite me back. But Insiditus, let's go ahead, get your horse teeth ready. I'm going to toss you the keys to the Carpenter caboose. Everyone climb on board this train as Incitus starts shoveling in coal and chugs us out of Dead Rabbit Radio Command all the way out to a little boy's bedroom. Chugga 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 chug chug. Riding the rails in the Dead Rabbit. What was it called? Riding the rails in the Carpenter caboose. I forget the names of the vehicles that we make up sometimes. Oh, actually, that reminds me. Getting older. I turned 48 the other day. I was during my break. Thank you, everyone, for all of your birthday wishes. Yeah, I was really just kind of stressed out. Had all this personal stuff going on. So those birthday wishes, they were awesome. Just kind of keeping my mood going, knowing you guys were thinking about me. Fantastic stuff, guys. You guys totally rock. You guys are all rock stars, and I appreciate every single one of you. We're headed all the way out to this little boy's bedroom. We're about to meet this young boy. He's about 5 or 6 years old. Let's call him Brian. He didn't use his real name when he posted this on the X board. It's the early 2000s. We're in Brian's bedroom. It's a Friday night. His family's home. But, you know, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. Right? That's kind of how my childhood was. Like, I got to go to my room. Usually because I was in trouble. I was sent to my room. I wasn't allowed to leave. But, you know, I'm upstairs listening to music. And my brother's downstairs watching the football game. And my dad's in the living room watching Cop Rock or Doctor Who or Space 1999. And my mom would be reading. You know, family, everyone's kind of doing something different. And that was the same situation at Brian's house. He was upstairs in his room watching TV. He was watching a VHS copy of Rockstar Barbie. I mean, literally, he's like, oh, I've watched The Lion King so many times. Oh, The Rescuers Down Under. I don't know if I can watch that again. What can I possibly watch? I guess I'll watch Rockstar Barbie. He's putting in Rockstar Barbie. He's watching it. Dun 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 dun. Go Barbie! It's a sunny day in Barbie Land. Everybody already has a tan. He's just sitting there. He's like getting ready to blow his brains out. He's like, well, this is life, I guess. Because I'm 6 years old listening to this horrible Barbie music. Put a BB gun in his mouth. Anyway, that's a little dark. But anyways, he's watching this Rockstar Barbie on VHS, and all of a sudden, the television starts to get fuzzy. And the song has ended. The animated adventures of Barbie, Ken, Skipper, and whoever else is in Barbie Land has ended. He sees a image of an endless body of water. And floating in the middle of this water is a small rowboat. And sitting in the rowboat is Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger, amazing fictional character. Child of 1,000 maniacs is his byline. If you don't know anything about the story, Jason, before you tell us the origin of Freddy Krueger, please finish the real story before you go, because we know you're some big Freddy Krueger lunatic. Okay. Then I'll give you some Freddy backstory. But anyways, I can't wait to talk about Freddy Krueger. But it's whatever I have to say about Freddy Krueger is not as scary as this story, so I will continue on. Brian's sitting there on the bed. Rockstar Barbie got all fuzzy. Now it's been replaced by this image of an endless body of water, a rowboat with Freddy Krueger in it. Brian's like, what? Like, what the hell's going on? It's terrifying. There's a lot of stuff that could happen, just the television shuts off, or he kept watching Rockstar Barbie and was contemplating suicide yet again. But this was the scariest of all options. He sees Freddy Krueger, bane of any child's existence, sitting in the rowboat. That's scary enough. Freddy Krueger turns and looks at Brian and goes, would you like to join me? Freddy Krueger's sitting in the boat and he kind of just puts his hand out, waiting for Brian to make a decision on this. Would you like to join me? Brian gets off the bed and quickly begins to walk out of his bedroom. And here's the thing. He has a big family. He lives with grandma and grandpa and his parents and sisters and cousins. They all live in this house. And there's a chance that all that's going on is someone recorded over his Rockstar Barbie VHS. It would happen, it'd be it would be a hilarious prank, right? That'd be so funny to do. But prank or not, and it's most likely a prank, Brian's like, this is super spooky. I don't like Freddy Krueger. I wouldn't, anything Freddy Krueger, prank or not, is terrifying. Brian begins to quickly walk out the bedroom door, and that is when Freddy Krueger leans out of the television set. His head and his arm are now in our world. He's leaning out of the TV, telling Brian, I'm gonna take you to Sheol with me. Brian loses it at this point. I think we all would. I think anybody would. Wes Craven would be freaked out if this happened. Freddy leans out of the television set, enters our world. I'm gonna take you to Sheol with me, he yells. As Brian runs out of the bedroom, runs to the living room. Mommy, big crybaby, just something exiting the world of the fictional into our world. Mommy, oh, I'm so scared. Brian runs into the arms of his mom. He said, I refuse to go to bed, that's fair. He's like, oh, I'm a little tired, I'm gonna go back in the bedroom. Hopefully the dream demon will not be there. He says, I didn't go back to bed. I didn't even go back to my bedroom. For the rest of the night, I slept with my mom. And he goes, I didn't even sleep. Right? Because again, listen, and Freddy Krueger is so awesome because he gets you during the one thing you have to do. You don't have to go camping. You don't have to be at an Arctic research station. You don't have to do a ton of different ways that you get killed. You don't have to go into an old house in Texas and start kind of pissing off the people who live there till Leatherface shows up. But everyone has to sleep. Even Jason Voorhees and Leatherface, Michael Myers, they all have to sleep too. Freddy Krueger is king. So Brian's like, I'm not going to sleep tonight. Even if I wanted to. It's probably not safe. Brad said, I just laid next to my mom until the sun came up the next morning. Brian is now in his late 30s. When he posted this, he goes, listen, I'm in my late 30s now, and my therapist tells me it was just a bad dream I had as a kid. He also says that apparently Brian now, in his late 30s, he's probably been suffering from it for a while, but he is schizophrenic. And he goes, I might be schizophrenic, but that was not a dream. And I don't think it was a delusion either. I think that actually happened. I think Freddy Krueger came out of my television set. You go, Jason, you should have told us he was schizophrenic in the beginning. But here's the thing. Schizophrenia, generally speaking, happens or gets triggered, or whatever term you want to use, in late teens, early 20s. And then it can go on a little bit further. But once you get into your 40s and 50s, if you don't already have schizophrenia, I think you're safe. A 5 or 6 year old, I'm not saying they can never have schizophrenia. But let's take a look at this story. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. First off, let me tell you all the great Freddy Krueger facts. Now, I'll save those till the end. But the interesting thing is, Freddy Krueger, the story of Freddy Krueger, is based on a true story. We did a whole episode on that. I'll put it in the show notes. It's one of my favorite topics we've covered on this show. Freddy Krueger is based on a true story. In short, there was a bunch of people coming over. I think it was from Laos or Cambodia. They were coming over after the Vietnam and during the Vietnam War. And children who had been over there and had survived the death camps in America began having these dreams of this malevolent, demonic army general, like this authority figure, and they would have the worst nightmare they ever had, and they'd wake up and they would tell Their family had the worst dream I ever had. Oh, that was so scary. And then the next night when they went to sleep, they died in their sleep. This was reported by the LA Times. They did a series of articles on this story. And Wes Craven was reading these articles. He was down in LA at the time. He's like, oh my God, this is the scariest thing I have ever heard of. I'm going to make a movie about it. And he's been very open about this. He talks about it on the commentary for Nightmare on Elm Street. He's talked about it in multiple interviews. That was a real event that was going on. These young people, teenagers, just like the victims in Nightmare on Elm Street, were having these horrific nightmares. The next night they died. There's a series of articles. Put all that in the show notes. So we already have a real life connection to Freddy Krueger as far as that goes. And I've talked about this. I just talked about it as recently as a week ago on my podcast, where I saw Freddy Krueger in the real world. Where I had this Brave Star action figure, and I had the villain's face, and I kind of carried it around like a doll. Like I had this toy with me all the time, and the face became Freddy's face, and he was laughing at me, and I threw the doll. I threw the doll and ran into my great grandma's room. Threw the doll down. This is Freddy Krueger. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'll just keep walking around with you. Terrified. So Freddy Krueger is based on a real life phenomenon. So that's already interesting that it's entering the real world in this story and in the story that I saw, right? Little face. The other thing that was interesting was that when he posted this on the X-Board, he said that Freddy wanted to take me to Sheol. Now, I understood that reference. I don't know if Brian did, because he didn't include it in his story. Other people were posting, and I got it right away. Sheol, and I might be mispronouncing it. I can almost guarantee that I am, but it's for lack of a better term, the Jewish realm of the dead. Sheol is specifically mentioned in the Old Testament, and King James versions, a lot of times they just change it to hell. Basically means the land of gloom and deep darkness. Sometimes it's considered like a purgatory, sometimes it's a permanent destination. But if you're a 5 or 6 year old kid and you don't know what that term means, and Freddy Krueger would, because he's a dream demon, and it says, I'll take you to Sheol, now you're in your late 30s and you post a story on the X-Board, and someone goes, oh, that's funny, that's actually a real term for the land of the dead, the land of gloom and darkness. Think about how terrifying that would be if you just heard a weird word as a kid in such a horrifying event. You're like, was that in Nightmare on Elm Street 6? I never saw that one. Is Sheol the name of Freddy's Arcade? I don't know. And you find out it's actually a real location that it's spoken about in the Jewish faith. That would be absolutely terrifying. You just thought it was a weird word, and now there's this connection. So it even cements that even more. If he didn't know what Sheol meant when he was 5 or 6, and unless he was Jewish, he probably didn't, that means that this thing is real. It wouldn't be a dream. It wouldn't be a hallucination. Can a dream or this is an interesting question. Can a dream or a hallucination give you information you were not privy to before? I actually think probably there are people, and there's probably arguments that they can. But I'm saying, like, you dream, you've never heard about the Titanic, you never watched the movie, you didn't know anything about that boat, and then you had a dream, not even through osmosis, not because your mom was talking about it. Oh, Leo, he's so dreamy in that movie Titanic when he froze to death. You're like, what? Could you have a dream about a ship called the Titanic and it hitting an iceberg and sinking and the heart of the ocean being thrown into the ocean? Kate Winslet running around, all that stuff. Could you know any of that stuff if you didn't know any of that stuff? Could you have a dream with those details, those exact details? I don't know, actually. But anyway, so this could have been a dream right now. I'm like kind of shooting holes through my own argument, but that's what happens when you just kind of talk off the cuff. Creepy, though, because you do have this character who is not truly fictional. It's a real event that was turned into a horrific fictional character that then millions of people feared. Well, millions of school kids feared. I was one of them. I couldn't even stand the thought of Freddy when I was a kid. Now he's, like I said, one of my favorite fictional characters. You're like, Jason, that's pretty bold. I know you keep saying that. Where does Huck Finn fall into that? What about Atticus Finch or Snowball? Those are all... I never read Huck Finn, but Snowball's pretty cool too. Atticus Finch is a couple steps below Freddy Krueger, but I love Freddy Krueger. I think he's probably the most evil villain in fiction. And he started off, now I get to do my Freddy facts as you fast forward. Freddy Krueger, if you don't know, his mom was raped. You're like, Jason, this is horrific. Why are you talking about this? His mom was raped in a mental hospital. She was already insane and she was put in a mental hospital. And then there was a breakout and she was raped by all the inmates. And during that, she became impregnated with Frederick Krueger, aka the child of 1,000 maniacs. I mean, that's already probably one of the darkest origin stories. That's not even the beginning. Like, you don't find that out until, like, I don't know, Nightmare on Elm Street 4 or 5. Then he was a child killer. He was killing children at a school where he worked as the janitor. And he'd built this glove with these knives on it in his real world. And it's fictional to us, but... And he's murdering children. He gets arrested for murdering children, brought to court, found not guilty of murdering children, even though he was. It was not a trumped up charge. He actually murdered kids. He got off on a technicality. He had a sleazy lawyer who found a loophole who let him walk free. So the people of Springfield, I think is the name of the town. Springfield, Springwood. The parents of the town are so outraged that this child killer went free that they decide to form a mob and they burn him alive. They go to his shack, like where Willie, that's where the Simpsons has the Willie shack. Freddy Krueger basically had this shack and they burned him alive and he died. And now he's getting revenge against the kids of the people who justifiably killed him. It would be one thing if he was a spirit of vengeance. No, he's just a brutal murderer who walked on a technicality, and the people of Springfield got their revenge, and then he goes, well, I'm going to kill all of your children to get back at you for justifiably killing me. So true evil. Truly an evil character. I think the only one that even comes close to him in the horror world is Chucky. Demonically possessed doll, soul of a serial killer, loves killing people, doesn't care who it is, has no real motive outside of trying to get one particular boy, but he'll kill. I guess the last season of Chucky, I haven't seen it yet, but he's in the White House. Apparently Chucky's, I don't know why I haven't watched it. Chucky's running around the White House. That sounds 100% my cup of tea. But yeah, Freddy Krueger, truly one of the most demented. It would be different if he was wrongly accused and he was getting revenge the only way. No, he just loves murdering people. And he murdered them in life and now he's murdering them in death and he doesn't care. It's fantastic stuff. I mean, it's quite grim when at first you just think it's a cool movie about a guy with a cool glove murdering people, and then you kind of step back and you're like, oh my god, this guy's actually... Like, Darth Vader has a lot of redeeming qualities. Jason Voorhees was just... That was a revenge story. Big Freddy Krueger fan. You're like, wow, Jason, I don't think you should say, well, his mom was raped. He was killing children, and he continues his bloodlust long after he's dead, and then follow that up by saying, he's one of my favorite fictional characters. Oh, he's fantastic. He's really good. What do you have to say about it, Freddy?
Tell him Freddy sent you.
Well, there you go. I just got to tell people that Freddy sent me. I guess that's what I would say. That little mechanical sound, he walks. That's his little feet.
I'm gonna split you in two. Ever played Skin the Cat?
But Jason, throw that toy away. I don't think it's a toy. I think you actually bought a possessed doll. There's no toy in the world that says, I'm gonna gut you. That just doesn't exist. I don't know where you got that. Inside-itis, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world-famous Carpenter copter we're leaving behind this boy's bedroom. Why don't you fly us all the way out to a local college? We're hanging out at this college and we're about to meet a young couple. We're going to call the man Mark and his girlfriend Sarah. And they're walking down the sidewalk after a lovely date. It's at night and this young couple is headed back home. Mark and Sarah are walking down the sidewalk, and they see up ahead there's some benches that are kind of like off to the side of the sidewalk, and there's some bushes and some benches, but standing near the benches, they see a man screaming his head off into a phone. Which, at least he's not. I mean, it would be way creepier if he was just screaming to nobody at night, right? At least he has a phone. At least he's screaming at somebody. It's less creepy for you. It's not so pleasant for whoever is on the phone. Mark and Sarah both kind of look at each other because they're like, oh, is this going to be a problem? This guy's just like, and I'm telling you, one more time, I've had this argument so much with you. What are you going to do about it? He's just completely going ape on whoever is on the other side of this phone call. But this is the path that Mark and Sarah need to take to get to where they're going. And he's not directly on the sidewalk, he's kind of off to the side. So we're just going to walk past him. Again, he's not some raving lunatic. He's raving, but he's yelling at somebody, so it's less alarming. Now, Mark, he's the one who posted this online. He said, me and my girl were walking down the sidewalk, and we saw this guy screaming his head off on the phone, having this huge argument. Like, we heard it, every word of it, before we even got close. We're just going to walk by him. And when they do, when Mark and Sarah actually walk by this man, and they're parallel to him at this point, Mark would say the man was at most 10 feet away from me, maybe closer. 8 feet to 10 feet is where this lunatic is having this huge argument on the phone. Right when they're walking past him, Mark catches movement out of the corner of his eye. This tendril, for lack of a better word, he really struggles to describe this, but this tendril shoots out of the man, and it's headed straight towards Mark. Everything happens so fast, but what he sees, he describes as a conish shaped object. He goes, a tendril is kind of the closest thing he can come to describing this thing. Shoots out of the man, it's headed right towards me. It wasn't solid. In fact, he said it looked like a bad CGI effect from the 90s. Like an underwater type of tendril, and it distorted reality around it. And this tendril is shooting out of the man towards Mark, and he's seeing it coming at him from his corner of his eye because they are completely parallel to this man at this point. He said it looked like really cheesy CGI. Underwater CGI, this tentacle is coming right towards him. He used the term, it had the texture of, quote, slightly distorted reality, unquote. So he's seeing this weird object, entity, tentacle, whatever word you want to use. We have a word that we're going to use in a little bit. Some of you might have already guessed it. Shoot out of this man. And it happens so quickly, Mark is able to take in that detail, but his brain begins to react to this thing as it is a threat. And instinctively, Mark says, I went into this like blocking pose. He said, I brought my arm and my elbow up to block my head, and he goes, I even did this leg lift. I lifted up my leg and my arm to almost block this thing. Right? But it's all of this stuff is processing in his head. He sees this thing, he goes, that can't be real. Nothing, that's not real. That's coming at me. A CGI tentacle, a water distorting reality, late at night or in the middle of the day, this can't be happening, but his body reacted to it anyways. He threw himself in kind of a defensive pose. He flinched. However, it didn't work. He wasn't able to block whatever it was, and at this point, he still doesn't know if it's anything. Is it like a distortion of the light? Like, what could possibly be going on? He puts himself in that defensive pose, he flinches, but then he feels it hit him. he feels the tentacle actually make contact with his body. And he described it as it felt like it was magnetic repulsion. This tentacle actually does strike him, and he feels this magnetic repulsion inside of him. The second, and the whole thing, it lasted only a second, but the second it ended, he does the flinch, the thing hits him, he feels this bizarre sensation in his body. The man on the phone immediately stops yelling. The fight's over. The man is now looking at Mark with a bewildered look on his face. He's staring at Mark, and Mark is looking over at him. And Mark, he has two possibilities of what he thinks just happened as far as there's a whole... he has a lot of questions about this, but about this particular moment, he goes, I don't know if the man stopped arguing and stared at me because he saw me flinch. He saw me just walk by him, and all of a sudden I kind of threw myself into this defensive pose for no reason. And that bewildered the man. He couldn't figure out why someone would do that. Or, Mark said, I don't know if the man saw it too. I don't know if the man saw something leave his body and enter mine. Because that would definitely stop any conversation you were having with anybody if you saw a tentacle launch out of your body and hit somebody nearby. And he doesn't have a chance to ask, because Sarah grabs Mark and they both continue on their way. They continue walking away. But it's not because Sarah wants to get to her destination quickly. Sarah pulls Mark and they start walking away. And when they get out of earshot of the man, she turns to Mark and says, did you see that? And Mark looks at Sarah and said, yeah, I did. What did you see? And Sarah goes, well, I saw something leave that man's body. It was a tentacle. This dark, pitch black tentacle shoot out of him. And then I saw you kind of flinch and it looked like it hit you. So now Mark is wondering, this is something you always look at when it comes to stories of the paranormal. When you have multiple witnesses, sometimes seeing it by a different angle, if one person sees something, some people doesn't, and another person doesn't, you could say, well, maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe you were particularly sleepy and she wasn't, it was hallucination, stuff like that. They both saw the same thing, a tentacle, but because she was standing at a slightly different angle, she was next to him, standing away from the man, she saw the same object, but she didn't see the distorted reality. She didn't see the CGI underwater effect. She saw it as a black tentacle shoot out of the man and hit her boyfriend. So that does give him a little bit of... first off, you'd think maybe you were too tired, maybe you were a little drunk or something like that. You could chalk it all up to a hallucination. But when she saw it too, that would kind of make him realize that this is a real thing that happened. And it probably does answer the question of whether or not the man saw it as well. Now, what's interesting, we're not done with the story, but I do want to interject this. We have talked about these entities before on this podcast. So I'll put them in the show notes. They're known as solar plexus clown gliders. And why they're called that, I am not 100% for sure. I don't know why they're named that. The name's really taken from a whole host of sources, the conspiracy theory iceberg being one of them, but then other writings about these entities that will wrap themselves around a human and feed off of their misery. We covered a story where and I've told the story 100 times on the podcast, so I'll keep it brief. I feel like I encountered one of these things. I was in college, I had to take a class, like a law enforcement class, so one of the things was like, you sit in a trial, go down this courthouse, sit in the trial, write about it. And I did, and as I was watching this trial, I'm sitting on the back on these hard plastic chairs, I'm just barely paying attention, and something catches the corner of my eye, And I turn and I look, and sitting on the orange hard plastic chair built into the wall, what I see is a king cobra. Now, I know it's not a real king cobra. I know there's really not a snake in the chair next to me, but I see it, and I see it do this hyper animated movement, and then it kind of launched itself at me, and I had a physical reaction to it. I kind of flinched. I started having really bad back pain, and I go, ow, ever since I went to that courthouse in those cheap orange chairs sitting in the back, I had a pinched nerve or just had back pain. I'd been in a ton of car accidents before then, so I didn't have the best back, but I was like, I was sitting in that orange chair for hours on end. My back really hurts. I went to the doctor. I said, hey, man, I'm having some back pain. It hasn't gone away. It's been here for about 2 weeks. And my doctor goes, oh, I'll tell you what. Here, I'm going to give you a prescription of 120 Vicodin a month. This is back in 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. He then upped it to 240 Vicodin a month. And for about 4 or 5 years, I was taking 240 Vicodin a month. And it was, I don't want to be dramatic, I don't think it was ruining my life, but it was definitely distracting me, because I was just doped to the gills most of the time. This was when I was making music, and I just stopped making music, because I was just playing PlayStation games and hanging out. There's nothing wrong with that, but I was also doped to the gills, 240 Vicodin a month. And eventually, I mean, I didn't really ruin my life, because I was always in the middle of madcap antics. I was always hanging out with people I probably shouldn't hang out with, or running with people I shouldn't be hanging out, or, doing things that I probably shouldn't have been doing. But that wasn't because I was on opioids. But it definitely made my life more difficult than if I had not been prescribed 120 or 240 Vicodin a month. And eventually, I changed doctors, and they go, there's no way we're giving you this much. Now it's 2010, 2011, I got a new job, so I had new insurance, and they're like, what? We're not giving you that. They weaned me off over time. Anyways, I didn't really put those two things together, and maybe they aren't connected, but I think they are, until I started working on this show. And I started coming across accounts of these serpentine or tentacle-shaped beings attaching themselves to humans and making their lives miserable and feeding off of that misery. And I thought, that actually would track. I always imagined that someone had left it there. This king cobra, this tentacle, this solar plexus clown glider, someone went to the courthouse and it had fed as much as it wanted off of them, and now it's just like a psychic landmine that I happened to sit next to, and it activated on me. We covered another story where a man's like at a liquor store, and he sees this woman come in, and he's like, she is like just beat up by life. Like, you could tell she's suffering from so many addictions and mental health problems. She's emaciated. There's just something broken about her physical body, but then he perceives this serpentine-like creature wrapped around her. He sees it. He says, I feel like I saw this separate entity feeding off of her. I'll put all those episodes in the show notes because we covered it even more. And so when I read this, I go, wow, could this tracks, right? We believe that these things move from body to body. The man being incredibly angry, when it leaves, this thing is the cause of all the anger. This thing is the cause of all the hate. This thing has slowly been building up over time and ruining this man's life, or diverting him from where he should be. And when it had already devoured as much energy as it wanted from this man, it leapt from him into the other person. And it's the tentacle shape. It's connected to strong emotions, like hateful emotions, right? There's a difference between being mad at someone and screaming at them over the phone in public. You just don't care at that point. But then the question goes, okay, so if this is a solar plexus clown glider, how is Mark doing? Mark posted this story online underneath the name No Juggernaut. And he ends his story with this. I thought this was really interesting. He goes, quote, I thought that was going to be the beginning of a lot of weird experiences. But nothing else like that ever happened. And now it's been years. But try to find a situation like that online. I dare you. No matter how I look, all I find is tentacle porn. All I can think of, I mean, that is going to happen a lot, but continuing the quote, all I can think is just that it was straight bad energy because that dude was vein popping raging at the time. But obviously, I don't actually know. Unquote. And he's right. I mean, the story of these tentacle beings, the story of these serpentine creatures jumping from body to body, they are very rare. And you could use a lot of different names for them. Solar plexus clown gliders, I mean, it's such a bizarre name. But it's very rare. I honestly think this is, we talk about it, and then I think there's been at least 2 or 3 other podcasts that have covered this information. And it is extremely rare. I actually messaged this guy and talked about solar plexus clown gliders. Probably put me on block. He's like, oh no, it's probably that crazy guy on the phone. He's tracked me down. But he goes, nothing really ever happened to me. This thing jumped into my body. It's been a couple years. Everything's fine. Like, I'm not seeing any weird stuff. I don't even know what it was. Well, what's interesting is I start going through, like, other posts he does, looking at his responses, because he posted this on Reddit. People respond and stuff. And he had a theory. He said, he always considered himself conflict averse. Quote unquote conflict averse. He says a lot of times I be the one who would diffuse an argument. If there were people fighting when I was growing up and even now, I will get into the middle of the argument, but I will take the blame for whatever's going on to diffuse the situation. So he's turned himself into a sacrificial lamb. And he says that could be why this bad mojo went into him, because he receives negative stimuli just to kind of absorb it, just to end the fight. He goes, maybe that had something to do with that. Maybe my ability of being conflict averse pulled the rage out of him. And it came into me, but it didn't do anything because I'm not an angry person. Like, he goes, my life's been completely normal since then. So you go, okay, Jason, but if you're saying that this is a solar plexus clown glider and these things mess you up, what's really interesting is I kept digging around, and he does say, you know what? And now that I think about it, he goes, after that happened, after that night, he didn't make this connection at the time, just like I didn't make the connection when I was suffering from back pain, and now I'm just on opioids all the time. I never go, oh, it's because of that snake. It's because of that weird hallucination I must have had, a waking dream, because snakes don't live in courthouses. As people are asking him questions about this stuff, he goes, you know what, now that I think about it, I did go through a bout of paranoia, which was quite unlike him. He goes, I'm not normally a paranoid person. But I do remember now, looking back, when I was in college, I started to get extremely paranoid about stuff. And the reason why, he goes, well, it's the stress of school, it's the stress of growing up and trying to balance all these things, but he felt himself becoming paranoid. And he says he had a bit of a mental breakdown. And he goes, well, the mental breakdown, stress of school, the stress of being young and having this future but not knowing what it is supposed to be or what it will be. And he goes, I did become paranoid for a while, and I had a mental breakdown. Not a huge one. He said, I also developed a downright terrified fear, like an irrational fear, a phobia of Candyman. He said, I remember watching that movie Candyman, and I just became so obsessed with not seeing him. I was so afraid the Candyman was going to get me, which, like, what? He's, like, not going to Willy Wonka's factory. You remember the movie Candyman with Tony Todd? He had the hook for the hand. He says his name 3 times. Candyman jumps out of the glass, the window. The mirror, actually, is what he's jumping out of it. He had an extreme paranoia of Candyman. But he, apparently, I think he's over those 3 things. I think his mental breakdown is done, because that did seem of the time. His paranoia may or may not still be around. He says he developed a bit of paranoia back then. He uses a lot of wiggle words, like a bit of paranoia, or a minor mental breakdown. I mean, listen, those things are just bad, no matter where they're at on the scale. And his obsessive fear of invoking the Candyman. With that added information, I think it is fair to say that that is what he encountered, was a solar plexus clown glider. It leapt out of this angry man into Mark, and it did cause these mental issues, paranoia and a mental breakdown, and obsessively fearing the Candyman. I mean, he's kind of the, sorry Tony Todd, but he's kind of one of the lamest movie villains, I think. I was never a huge fan of the Candyman. That was my sister's favorite movie, and she's an idiot, right? We all know Freddy Krueger is the best. So, I think that's what this was. And what's interesting is, let's take him at his word. Let's say he had a bit of paranoia. Let's say he had a minor mental breakdown. This would actually be, there's good and bad to take out of this story. The bad part is the idea of, if these entities actually exist, and I do believe that they do. I do believe that these things are real. I don't know where they come from. I don't know if some people ascribe them as an alien type of infestation. For some people, it's demonic is the answer. Some people, it's an interdimensional being. I don't know where they come from. I don't know how they work. But what we've been able to put together over a couple episodes now is that is how they transfer from body to body like that. So when the one that I had attached to me, when it eventually left, I couldn't even say it was this day or this year where I just felt better. All of that weight was lifted off of me. It doesn't work like that. Just the same way when you don't realize when your life's getting worse, because it usually happens in stages. The guy screaming on the phone, he probably wasn't like that 3 years earlier. He probably was slightly angry about stuff. What? Chicken for dinner again? And then it's like, you couldn't say, well, this was the day I became angry man. Stuff builds up over time. These things attach to you, and Mark's story, kind of like mine, is you're just minding your own business. You're sitting in a chair. You're walking down a street, and these things can leap forward and wrap around you, and you don't know what it is. You don't know how to prepare for what it is. You don't know anything about these things. You think it's like, oh, that's weird. I just saw something weird. So it could happen to you. It could happen to anybody. That's the terrifying thing about these. They seem to be incredibly rare, because the amount of stories we're finding on them are, how many times have we talked about it on the podcast? 4, maybe? 4 times, 4 different incidents. We've talked about them a ton on the podcast, but actual times we've been able to say this story involves a solar plexus clown glider. After 1,400 episodes in 6 years, where I'm obsessively finding the weirdest stuff to talk about, we found 4, and one of those stories was mine, and one of the 4 was this one. So there's maybe 2 other ones. They seem to be exceedingly rare, but if you don't want to have a ghost chase you, you can kind of limit those options. Don't go to a haunted house, don't go to a haunted graveyard. If you don't want to interact with demons, don't use a Ouija board. There's stuff that you can kind of do. If you don't want to get abducted by aliens, sorry, bro, they're coming through your walls. They don't care. They'll get you anywhere. But if you don't want Bigfoot to punch you in the face, don't go into the woods. There's certain things you can use to not be affected. But this solar plexus clown glider phenomenon, you just be walking down the street, sitting in a courtroom. There's not really any way to protect yourself against these things. What's interesting, though, and we'll wrap it up like this, if we take Mark at his word, these things may not be all powerful. See, I was always a knucklehead. I was always looking for a fight or doing something stupid. So when I was put in a situation, I mean, it always sounds so funny when I say it, where I had all of a sudden 240 Viking in a month, and now I'm doped up. My already poor decision-making skills were worse. But I was always a knucklehead. I probably would have had the same adventures whether or not I was given these pills, because I was constantly making dumb decisions. Fun decisions, sure. Awesome, good time, having a great weekend decisions, 100%. But looking back as a 48-year-old man, you're like, that was dumb. I mean, like, it was fun. It was fun. We had good times, didn't we? But not super smart. You're very lucky, very blessed, young Jason, that you made it out. So the fact that it attached to me, I already had so many vulnerabilities as far as, I'm equating fun, doing fun things with doing things that were extremely dangerous. I'm not talking about skydiving either, so you know what I mean? I'm not talking, he used to do slalom racing? He used to bike across America? No. So we had that. I wonder if your defenses are up to a certain level, that these things can attack you, they can attach to you, but they won't cause an entire flip. They won't turn you into a meth-addled woman walking into a convenience store late one night, looking like you're starving to death, because you're spending all your time doing meth and no time eating or even showering. If it attaches to someone who's pretty well put together, like this guy, he's always jumping in the middle of the fights. He doesn't like conflict. He tries to bring the energy down, and he basically absorbs it himself and then just gets rid of it. When this entity attached to him, it may have had a very short stint on Mark. It may not have been around very long because it wasn't giving him the negative energy that it wanted. It tried turning him into a paranoid mess. It tried giving him a huge mental breakdown to the point where he has to check himself in, but it couldn't succeed in those things. Because there was something about Mark that made him harder to feed off of, or harder to corrupt. Because that's what it wants. It wants the negative energy. It wants to feed off the negative energy that humans produce. A term that's usually called Loosh. Put that episode in the show notes. So that's good news, right? That's good news. It means that while these things could be anywhere at any time, you may trigger one of these. Maybe they're not the world enders that I have said in previous episodes. Basically, like, if one of these gets a hold of you, you're going to be in for a bumpy ride. It could ruin your life, but it's possible that this young man had such strong already ideas about what he felt was right and wrong, and he already found himself disliking conflict to the point that he would absorb it rather than add to the anger. The Loosh jumped on the wrong person. And I'm not saying it withered up and died and we all were like, whoa, we destroyed one, it's afraid, and the solar plexus clown gliders are now slinking back to their dimension. No, I'm not saying that, but any victory against these possibly unstoppable invaders of the human soul, we gotta take the W for that one. So it's possible. That's an interesting new nugget of information to this story of the solar plexus clown gliders. And a good piece of info. Maybe there is a way to stop these things. Maybe there is a way to keep these things from completely distracting or derailing your life, and in some cases, destroying your life. And it's just having a good psychic defense system, a good sense of self, a good moral code, something that you truly believe in. These things would be toxic to a creature that feeds off negativity like a solar plexus clown glider. So while these things can be anywhere and they seemingly can infect anyone at any time, it doesn't mean that they'll be able to take the same hold on everybody as they do on some people. And that is good. Like I said, we've covered this a couple times. There's not much good news when we cover these things. So that would be a unique wrinkle in that whole story. If you could actually fend these things off, you still get infected, but some people have good immune systems. Some people have bad immune systems. They'll both still get the flu, but one person might, get a sniffly nose for a day while the other person ends up in the ICU. Same disease. Their bodies are reacting to it differently. So it sounds like that might be the case with these solar plexus clown gliders as well. So it does give us a little bit of hope when you're fighting against entities of unmeasurable power. Creatures that we don't even know where they come from or why they've chosen this place. Sometimes when all of the odds are stacked against you, hope is the only thing you truly have. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one.